Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. It's time to go through the helicopters that are in text past the devs for July of 2023, or as one of my good mates calls them, Helima choppers. These ones are picked because I kind of just find them interesting, and also some good old community picks, so SK picked one of them, and a few others were picked by some others as well. So, let's get into it and have a look. The first vehicle is the BAE Mi-24 Hind-D. This may sound weird, but you'll see what it means. When the Soviet Union collapsed, a large number of countries became populated with large amounts of Soviet equipment, most of which needed upgrading. An area which was of particular interest to Western defense companies were the former Warsaw Pact nations in Eastern Europe, which recently decided to join NATO, these being Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Romania, Hungary, and Bulgaria. These nations all had large amounts of Soviet-style equipment left over, a lot of which needed to be integrated into NATO by one means or another, or else face scrapping or replacement. Since the organization's founding in 1949, there was always a push for commonality between the countries in order to enhance the effectiveness of the fighting force by simplifying logistics. The addition of a wide variety of Soviet-designed aircraft, AFVs, and ships to the order of battle, many of which went completely against NATO's standard design, doctrine, and tactics, would only confuse matters. To add to these issues, many of the countries could not afford to replace their old equipment, due to the economic woes of the time. In order to mitigate both problems, Western defense corporations quickly began development of upgrade programs for Soviet-designed equipment. Many upgrades were put forward for a wide variety of tanks, jets, and helicopters in order to make them compatible with NATO standards and or enhance their fighting capability. This suggestion is focusing on an obscure upgrade to one of history's most well-known helicopters, a British upgrade package for the MIL Mi-24 Hind. It may come as a surprise to think that the British, BAE specifically, would consider upgrading the Hind. However, Western upgrades to the Hind are relatively common, with the French companies Sagem and Israel's Elbit offering upgrades, and South Africa's ATE offering the significantly modified Super Hind, to mention a few. Therefore, it is unsurprising that BAE got involved in the Hind upgrade. The company was expecting a sizable order from the Visegrad group of nations, who formerly formed part of the now-collapsed Warsaw Pact. In addition to this, the upgrade program was also tendered to other nations, with Bulgaria and Croatia taking an interest in some point. The project seems to have been announced in late 2001, with a mock-up displayed at Helitech that year. Negotiations and developments went on between 2002 and 2003, and despite the prospects, the project seems to have come to an end by 2004. This is due to shifting priorities, delays, and also reduced orders. For instance, Poland reduced its order, with other countries reducing their orders as well, or choosing other development partners instead. Of note is the convoluted nature of this project, with many different articles stating different things about the helicopter. This may be due to a number of reasons. To begin with, the project may have been incomplete, with certain aspects stated by the manufacturer not being added to the prototype, which itself never flew, and acted more of a testbed for possible upgrades. Finally, it's likely that the customizable nature of the helicopter, meaning that different countries could order different weapons and electronic upgrades to suit their needs, leading to a rather large variety of possible armaments for the specific aircraft. As much as it would be nice to go through, unfortunately, it's kind of all over the place. According to Janes, the helicopter was a Hind-D purchased in non-flying condition. The company offered a wide-ranging upgrade and life extension program, though countries could mix and match what they wanted in regards to electronics and weapons. As mentioned previously, BAE proposed giving the helicopter the CDU-900 multifunction control and display units. This was in addition to an AN/ARC-220HF and Talon V UHF transceivers, as well as the AN/ARN-153 TEC and the AN/ARN-155 multimode receiver as an upgrade to the navigation equipment. In regards to the defensive suites, the helicopter would be fitted with the high-DAS defense suite as fitted to the Apache H-1 in British service. The center of the entire upgrade was the Titan 385 multi-sensor turret, which included a laser rangefinder, infrared surveillance camera, and color and low-light television cameras. This replaced the Raduga FSH, finally the HGU-56P helmet, and the AN-AVS-7 heads-up display. Changes to the crew stations allowed the gunner to receive more tactical information, thus allowing to take some workload off the pilots, reducing stress, making the crew's job more efficient. BAE's upgrade to the Hind would also have made it compatible with NATO weapon systems, as well as allowing it to use older Soviet types. The type was able to use the standard armament of the Hind-D. In addition to this, the type was meant to use the new anti-tank missiles, these being the HOTS and the Spike ERs, the former offered by BAE and the latter being requested by Poland. Slovakia also requested for the integration of the Attacker missile from Russia. The type retained the 12.7mm gun, though the Otobreda M197 3-barrel 20mm cannon was also put forward. The CRV-7 rocket also seems to have been put forward, and according to Janes, the usage of NATO weaponry would have featured weight savings of up to 200 kilos, though this would be reduced if using Soviet-made weapons. Then we have the Bell 412 SP ARAPAHO. This was a multi-role helicopter that was developed from the Bell 212 in the late 70s. The Bell 212 was in turn a further development of the Bell UH-1B, but while the UH-1B was a single-engine machine, both the 212 and 412 had two far more powerful turbine engines. The most important improvement from the 212 to the 412 was the use of an advanced four-bladed main rotor, slightly smaller in diameter than the two-bladed one on the 212. The Bell 412 first flew in August 1979 and deliveries began in 81. In the early 80s, the Air Force began looking for a successor for the UH-1B, which was approaching its technical life. Among the candidates were the Aerospatiale 332 Super Puma, the Bell UH-1D, and the Bell 412. And finally, one went in for 6 Aerospatiale 332s. However, it turned out that the cost of this would be very high. Meanwhile, an improved version of the Bell 412 had been launched, namely the Bell 412 SP. It had greater fuel capacity, greater load capacity, and was less affected by vibrations than the previous version. Norway initially ordered 12 such machines. The first was to be built by Helicopter Service AS at Sola in Sjo, and delivered to 339 Squadron at Bardufoss. Within the community, there was some skepticism about the 412 SP, partly because it lacked a lift system. In retrospect, a number of childhood illnesses appeared, but mostly the crews have been very satisfied with the machines. In 1986, the announcement came that the phasing out of the UH-1B was to start, and it was on the cards that both 720 Squadron and the helicopter department at 719 were to be closed down. However, the closure of 720 Squadron was prevented, and in January 87, a further 6 machines were ordered to be used by the squadron. 719 Squadron was loaned 1 helicopter from 339 Squadron from April 1990 to 1992, at the same time as the UH-1B was eventually put on the ground. But from the 31st of December 2000, 719 Squadron was closed down. 339 Squadron now has a detachment in Bodo in Norway. The American-built helicopter crashed at Bardufoss due to a technical fault a few months after delivery, and the crash resulted in a 6-month flight ban for all 412 SPs until the cause was clarified. This aircraft was replaced, and the last one was delivered from Sola on the 29th of October 1990, exactly 3 years after the first Norsk Bygd 139 had been delivered. Rescue lifts had eventually been installed on some of the helicopters, both on 720 and 339 Squadron, and in 2010, 6 machines were upgraded to the 412 HP standard. 720 Squadron has, to some extent, been earmarked for service under UN auspices, and 4 machines were sent to Bosnia under NORAIR on the 4th of October 1993. The engagement lasted until 1996, and since then, Norway has made helicopters and crews available twice to NATO in Kosovo and to ISAF in Afghanistan. The last operation was to last for 4.5 years, from April 2008 to October 2012. The tasks have mainly been linked to medical departments and the transport of the sick and injured, but the machines often had to fly in pairs, one with 2 Gatling machine guns, clear and open transport doors, the other fitted for sick transport. This is the first time that Norwegian helicopters have been armed in this way, and the Bell 412 thus becomes the most used Norwegian helicopter in war situations since the last World War. In Norway, the Bell 412 is used mainly to support the army with the transport of personnel and equipment, but also as an ambulance for search and rescue, forest firefighting, surveillance and reconnaissance, and as a mobile command post as some of its roles. From the 1st of January 2013, 720 Squadron at Rig has also maintained 24-hour standby to be able to assist police in sharp missions should they need to arise. The next vehicle is the CARDOEN-BELL 206L3, and in 1984, Carlos Cardoen, a Chilean engineer and businessman, commissioned an engineering report to the aeronautical engineer René M. Gonzalez within 3 months, in which the feasibility of modifying a civilian helicopter for military use would be studied. On that occasion, it was the German device, the MBB BO-105, and the construction of the first mock-up began between 85 and 86. During the International Airfair, the mock-up of the attack helicopter based on the BO-105 was presented, which was very well received by people since it was an excellent option for developing countries. The modification left the helicopter with a remarkable different profile, converting it into a single-seater and adding an arms-carrying wing that in certain flight altitudes improved aerodynamic performance. The pilot's protection increased significantly as vulnerability to attack from the ground also decreased, and the rear part of the fuselage was also intervened. It also included a Lucas turret. However, and due in large part to the political situation in Chile at the time, representatives of FIDA 86 of the German company MBB that manufactured the BO-105 strongly opposed authorizing the modification after seeing it exhibited. So unfortunately, this first intention didn't prosper beyond the mock-up stage. After MBB's refusal, the BO-105 was discarded as a platform and a new aircraft to be redesigned was chosen, the well-known Bell Long Ranger 206L3. In October 86, Cardoen Industries contacted the company Bell Helicopter Textron Incorporated to carry out a joint project, initiative that was well received by the North American company. After efforts by the INCAR presidency in February 1987, René Gonzalez traveled to Dallas to participate in the HAI, or the Helicopter Association International exhibition. At this fair, technical meetings were held with a commission of Bell engineers to consider the technical aspects of the modification, initially maintaining the intention of building an attack helicopter. Work began in 1987 in conjunction with Bell Helicopter Textron, holding meetings in the US and Canada and arriving at the drafting of a preliminary design report in which they presented proposal monographs. As in the case of the BO-105, a structural modification was considered that made the helicopter single-seater. As one of the first configurations considered by the INCAR team was an attack helicopter with a tandem cockpit. However, such a configuration was discarded for reasons of stability and control, as the location of the center of gravity would be very different from that original model. After the talks in February of 87, in April of the same year, an INCAR BHTI meeting was held at the Fort Worth plant. At that meeting, BHT delivered a report with a modification proposal of a single-seat configuration, which included a 3-view diagram, weapons possibilities, avionic equipment, design and development controls, work plan, etc. However, BHTI required INCAR to invest a large sum of money derived from the engineering and development work that would be provided mainly by BHTI. So it was finally decided that all this work would fall into the hands of Cardoen Industries, keeping Bell as an associated company. INCAR was thus able to save a lot of money, so INCAR had the entire project in its hands along with the construction of the prototype. Unlike the mock-up based on the Bolko BO-105, which was built in wood, the mock-up of the Bell 206 was built in aluminium, to be used later in different tests for the industrious Cardoen, imported a fuselage Bell Long Ranger who had been in an accident. The main beam was repaired by technicians specialized in aircraft structures, Guido Velez and Jose Velez. Then the front third of the fuselage that would be intervened was removed. At first, the cabin was too small for the helicopter pilot. Luckily, the first test beams were made out of wood, so this was corrected by raising the roof of the original cabin by means of a vertical extension of the main beam. This modification would respond successfully in the structural tests, reinforcing the entire structure and serving as a canopy tower. In 1987, with the finished structural mock-up, a wind tunnel was simultaneously built to carry out other tests in the future. Meanwhile, the mock-up structure was subjected to different weight tests, using lead ingots in different positions to see if there was a deformation in the structure that were recorded by means of strain gauges. The new cab supported loads 3.5 times higher than the original, 16,000 pounds of frontal load without showing permanent deformation, which was a success, since with this new structural resistance, the helicopter could be used for civil and military missions. Bell seemed very satisfied with the modification made to the mock-up, so sent a letter demonstrating the support for the project and mentioning the construction of the helicopter in Spain, since it was not possible to export fuselages to Chile due to the Kennedy Amendment. However, Bell would surprisingly get out of the project, arguing that they considered it unlikely that the US government would grant the necessary permits for the production of the aircraft. Therefore, Industrias CARDOEN will continue the project on its own. Since the front parts of the original Bell helicopter had been modified, different aerodynamic tests had to be done to make sure that everything would work well in the future. The modeling team built several models at different scales of the original and the modified helicopter. The tests carried out on various occasions and in different temperature conditions did not show significant differences between the two models in either flow or pressure readings at key points, so the modification was fit to fly in the future. In November 1988, a demonstrative mock-up of the final version was built as an anti-tank helicopter from Bell that had crashed and was imported to Chile. So this mock-up was made from the original material and is considered the real Bell 206. It just didn't fly as the final prototype. It was considered sidearms to carry weapons, periscopic sight of the Norinco HJ-8 Red Arrow missile system, placed for the gunner behind the cockpit, proper configuration of the instrument panel and side panels, and then also a reflex sight for 2.75-inch rockets as well. Tests were also carried out in November of 1988 to see the feasibility of equipping the combat version, the AH, with the Red Arrow anti-tank missile manufactured by Norinco. The tests used missiles with only a third of the propellant charge and without a warhead. The original structure of the Bell Long Ranger, although it had hardpoints to fix medium weapons, was not designed to withstand explosive forces of this type. Therefore, after the tests, a deformation was noticed on the rear part of the fuselage, a part that had not yet been modified by CARDOEN Industries. So if they wanted to carry weapons of that caliber, several hours of engineering work had to be invested. However, modifying the original fuselage would alter the original center of gravity of the helicopter, so therefore this wasn't allowed. Once all the previous tests were passed, they were ready for the construction of the prototype, and all the advances that were made were kept strict and detailed records of plans according to the FAA standard, since it was always the intention of the project to obtain certification STC of this American agency for the commercialization of the civil version of the helicopter. Unlike the previous mock-ups, now the prototype had to be built to the millimeter. Everything had to be perfect for the mechanical civil engineer Jaime Ortuzar, responsible for quality control within the team, designed a JIG, which is a rigid metal frame where the structure that would be modified to obtain a final quality prototype remains fixed, or a jig. For the construction of the prototype, Industrias CARDOEN imported a Bell 206 Long Ranger US registration N38958. And when it comes to the prototype itself, it was decided to send it to the US to start the certification process and obtain the supplemental type certificate through the representation of Global Helicopter Technology Incorporated. In January of 1990, via Lufthansa, the prototype arrived at the GHT facility in Hurst, Texas to undergo the FAA testing program. An STC, in simple words, is the recognition and quality certification of any modification made to an existing aircraft. It is granted by the most prestigious aeronautical agency in the world, the Federal Aviation Administration, I should say. Simultaneously, while the prototype was in the US, the structural mock-up of the attack version that had been used for the launch of the Chinese Norinco missile was presented at the aviation fair in Chile, where different people could appreciate what the version had become. At the end of the attack that was so expected, General Matei of the Chilean Air Force was presented at the fair, together with other senior officials from the FACH and Carlos Cardoen himself, which generated great interest and support that was present. When the certification process was quite advanced and the different FAA tests had been passed, requiring minimal modifications, surprising to the extension of the STC was suspended, and on the 27th of March 1991, the prototype was confiscated by the North American Customs authorities, arguing that it had the characteristics of an attack helicopter as it was outfitted with 5 hardened points suitable for attaching gun units, rocket pods, and other weaponry that Incar intended to export it such to Iraq. Under the slander, the prototype was seized and never returned to its rightful owner, Incar. This would mean the total suspension of the project and the frustration of the possibility of building these helicopters in Chile. As the prototype without weapons was requisitioned, the project stopped there. In Chile, it was never possible to build the flying attack prototype that was wanted from the beginning, but at least the attack mock-up was built, which made from a real Bell 206 that had an accident and was imported to Chile, for which reason it had authentic materials. You can also see that it had 5 anchor points, but unfortunately never really made it anywhere. The next vehicle is the Eurocopter EC-665 Tiger PT-5R. In 1984, Germany and France made a decision to collaborate on the creation of a new combat helicopter to supplement and eventually replace the aging BO-105s and Gazelles. To this end, the Eurocopter Tiger GmbH was formed in 1985 and work on the Tiger began. In total, 5 prototypes will be constructed, the first 3 of these being used to test the aerodynamics and avionics of the Tiger, the 4th being a prototype for the HAP variant, and the final one being a prototype for the UHT. This prototype, the PT-5, would eventually be updated to the PT-5R, and would be the final Tiger prototype before serial production began. The PT-5R, being a predecessor to the UHT, shares many similarities. The most obvious of these is the Osiris mass-mounted sight, which enables the weapons officer to have a clear view while potentially being concealed behind terrain. The PT-5R also shares its armament with the UHT, with the ability to carry a combination of Hot 380 GMs, Pars 380 GMs, FC-225 70mm rocket pods, or 12.7mm gun pods in the inner pylons, as well as a total of 4 ATASs on the outer pylons for self-defense. Also shared between the two Tigers is the lack of a chin-mounted turret, instead being replaced with an FLIR camera for the pilot. The PT-5R being a pre-production prototype, however, means that some features present on the production model were not available. Firstly, the PT-5R lacks both a radar warning receiver and laser warning receiver, the socket where they would be on the production model being plated over. Secondly, the Sapphire M chaff flare system located on the underside of the fuselage was omitted entirely for the prototypes. This lack of any soft or hard countermeasures means the pilots of the PTR-5 will have to really rely on its extreme maneuverability, mass-mounted sight, and fire and forget Pars 380 GMs. The last helicopter is the Bell Textron Model 249. During the 1980s, the Bundeswehr was looking to replace the aging BO-105 with a new dedicated anti-tank helicopter. To this end, the Bundeswehr initiated the Panzerraubwerkschrauber II, or PAH-2 program, to which several helicopter manufacturers responded with proposals, including Westland, VFW Fokker, MBB, Augusta, and, of course, Bell. While other companies could only offer pre-production mock-ups, Bell would present a fully functional, modified version of their combat-proven AH-1 Cobra. The Cobra presented to Germany for testing was a modified AH-1S known as the Model 249, and featured the 4-bladed rotor of the Bell 412, as well as a 412 tail rotor. In addition to its unique rotor setup, which provided a significant boost in the Cobra's maneuverability and load carrying capabilities. The armament was also expanded to include the potential additions of Hellfire ATGMs in place of the TOW ATGMs, and either a total of 4 FIM-43 Red-Eyes or FIM-92 Stingers, mounted in twin pods on each of the wing tips. This model would be tested in the early 80s by ERPST-61 and would perform extremely well and would meet or exceed all the Bundeswehr's requirements. Unfortunately for the Model 249, however, fate would conspire against it, as neither the US Army or Bundeswehr was interested in adopting it. By this point, the US Army had already selected the AH-64 Apache to replace the Cobra, and wasn't interested in upgrading their existing Cobra fleet, while Germany decided to take what they had learned from foreign helicopter designs and apply it to a new design, partnering with France to create the Eurocopter Tiger. The Model 249 would continue to be used as a demonstrator before eventually being converted into a regular AH-1F and returned to the US Army, later being withdrawn from service and sold for parts. The planned production model of the Model 249 for the Bundeswehr, the PAH-2 Cobra, would also be fitted with several additional improvements over the version tested. Firstly, the M65 telescopic sight units would be replaced with the TADS PNVS as featured on the AH-64 Apache, which would provide a significant jump in capability compared to the M65. The Euro missile HOT would also be integrated, as well as the improvements present on the AH-1F, including the Kaiser head-up display for the pilot, Teledyne Systems digital fire control computer, Hughes laser rangefinder, Sanders ANALQ-144 infrared jammer, Northrop Grumman ANAPR-39 radar warning receiver, the ANALQ-136 radar jammer, Perkin-Elmer ANAVR-2 laser warning receiver, and an M130 general-purpose dispenser for launching chaff and flares. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Brendan Quinn, Vilneus, Character Fuel, Juan the Panda, Carrion Crow, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Merciless Reaper, Orangetail, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, Moxie, B. Young, Bareen, Peter Grayling, Alan Hacker, Sem Alslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R., and also Lafouche for supporting the channel.